Pronouns. All the time when speaking nearly any language, we effortlessly use these to replace noun phrases, and so much of what we say would get stupidly long without them. They're one of the most well-known word classes, especially recently, as a change in how people view it means that sharing your pronouns with someone when you meet is becoming more normal in many places and situations. However, like all parts of language, it changes all the time to suit the speakers. What if there was a fundamental change to the way pronouns work in English unfolding right in front of us, and that soon English pronouns will have no number distinction? So, before we investigate this potential shift, let's go through a quick overview of English pronouns as they are most often used. There are a bunch of different ways to carve up the pronoun paradigm in different languages, but here I'm just focusing on the ones most relevant in Standard International English, which are person, aka who is being referenced in relation to the people in the conversation, number, aka how many people or things are being talked about, and gender, which is pretty self-explanatory. In English, there's also a distinction based on some sort of grammatical case/sentence position sort of thing, but that's a story for a whole nother video. Okay, so please hear me out. The idea that one of the key distinctions in our pronoun system is fading away probably seems really wacky at first. Being the linguistics nerd that I am, I was just casually thinking about the English pronoun system in my spare time, as you do. And I could think of a surprising amount of cases in which pronouns that have been described as plural are used to refer to something singular. So I went and mentioned my thought in the Discord server Cave of Linguists, which is a really cool place by the way, you should check it out. Link in the description, it's a great place for anybody interested in linguistics or language learning. Anyway, let's start with what's going on with third person pronouns. As we saw before, usually the third person plural pronoun in English is they, and the singular can be it, she, he, they, or any other pronoun that people want to identify with. If you notice that they is listed as both numbers, that's the first clue. More and more, the default generic pronoun used for someone where the gender is unknown is they, even in the singular, and the use of generic he continues to fall out of favour. Some people are critical of this change, saying,
they is plural, get your grammar right.
And to that, I have two things to say. One, don't go around telling people how to use language because singular they works. People can understand it, so what's the problem with that? And two, singular they has legit been around for literally centuries, so it's not as if it's anything new or radical. Another thing that is happening more and more is that some people, especially people who identify as gender non-binary, choose they as the pronoun that they are most comfortable with. This further blurs the distinction between singular and plural in third-person pronouns. However, it is important to note that it doesn't look like this is erasing singular-only pronouns in the third person. There are still plenty of people who identify as he or she, or even other non-binary singular-only pronouns such as z. Finally, there is the peculiar pronoun it. I've seen prescriptivists complaining about singular they suggest this as a gender-neutral option for people to use. However, there are other connotations to the it pronoun. Although I have to mention that there are some people who feel most comfortable with the pronoun it. In many situations, it can feel kinda inhuman to refer to someone with that. As for animals, some people feel comfortable using the pronoun it, while others more often use they, but across the board, there is an anatomy line drawn somewhere between it and the other third-person singular pronouns. Also, there's another way that it is being used where there isn't really any number information in what's being referred to by it at all. In sentences like, it's raining, or it looks like we're gonna need an umbrella, there isn't really a referent corresponding to the pronoun it. This use is sometimes called dummy it. And yeah, for the purposes of our investigation as to the status of number in English pronouns, we can ignore these, which make up a good chunk of the uses of the word it. So, to recap the third person they, which is the only really common third person plural personal pronoun, has become the standard pronoun to refer to a singular person of unknown gender, and more people are also using it as their preferred pronoun. On top of that, a large chunk of the uses of it have nothing to do with number at all. However, lots of people still identify with other pronouns that are only used in the singular, and it is still used as the main third-person singular pronoun for inanimate objects, so it doesn't seem like number distinction in the third-person personal pronouns is totally fading out yet. How about the second person? Well, funnily enough, the main Standard International English has already had the number distinction removed. A few centuries ago, the distinction between singular thou and plural you was made by basically everyone. You for singular was an honorific, and thou got connotations of being disrespectful in many situations, so people started using it less and less. Over time, this led to the distinction fading, and it remains in a few places only. Nowadays, most English speakers only encounter the word thou in religious contexts or when they're reading an old text like Shakespeare, so for lots of people it has gained the opposite connotations of being extra fancy. Isn't it ironic, don't you think? However, turns out the number distinction in second-person pronouns is actually something that many English speakers have been missing. In lots of places, new second-person plural pronouns have been emerging. For example, in many parts of the USA, it's common practice to use y'all, and in some sociolects here in Australia, the plural form used is very common. These forms may be spreading. I don't know if it's from American media or through the internet or what, but I for one have found myself using y'all a lot more in the last few years. Interestingly, a similar thing to this happened in Dutch. After losing du, their equivalent of thou, and using jij as the equivalent of you regardless of number, a new form jullie emerged to distinguish the plural. Finally, we move on to the first person. To say that there is evidence that number distinction is disappearing in the English first person would really be some sort of wishful cherry picking, but there are still some limited examples of the plural being used to refer to a singular person. In some places, including here in Australia, but according to the internet, also including Ireland, Scotland, parts of England, and even small parts of Canada, specifically us can be used in place of me in limited situations. Here in Australia, it's only really used in requests such as give us a break, whereas in some other places it can be used to replace me anywhere it is being used as an indirect object. Though, as noted before, this is only used in specific situations, usually informally, and it would really be a stretch to call this evidence that the number distinction is disappearing. Okay, so let's recap. In the third person, the plural form is increasingly being used with singular referents, but only when they're animate. On top of this, a bunch of uses of the singular pronoun don't even have a referent. In the second person, the distinction between singular thou and plural you disappeared long ago for most speakers, but for lots of people, new plural forms have brought the distinction back. For the first person, in some places, some speakers use us as a singular in a request or as an indirect object. I think it's pretty clear, especially given the evidence from the second person, that personal pronouns in English are not losing their number distinction. However, this doesn't mean that there aren't many interesting quirks to do with number in our pronouns. If you know of interesting things like this happening in another language or even other examples in English, leave a comment or even find me in Cave of Linguists. See you next time!